All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go ahead and get started with our Education and Culture Committee. Today we're going to have a Montgomery County Public Schools Resource Equity Study briefing. And this is tied directly to a briefing that we all attended, I think, in this room for the most part on October 15th, which was our 2019 Black and Brown Forum for Educational Equity and Excellence. And certainly a lot of the information that we received as a result of that forum, I know we are going to discuss today. I really want to thank our superintendent, Dr. Jack Smith, as well as Dr. Munifa McKnight. And Dr. McKnight, I think this is the first time that you're testifying before Education and Culture in your role as Deputy Superintendent, so welcome. And then, of course, I know that we have our President of the Board of Education, Ms. Shevra Evans, here. So thank you very much for being here because this is an incredibly important topic. And I know that each of you on the dais, as well as all of our members of the board who are in attendance, who I'll recognize momentarily, also understand when the superintendent first came and members of the board said that we wanted to make sure that this is our person who's going to lead us into the next iteration of Montgomery County Public Schools, it became very quickly that his mantra of all means all was something that was not just talk or a slogan, but was something that he believed in. It came from his roots of where he came from in his educational experience, but also as one that he firmly believed you can only have a good system if everybody is performing. And the reality is that we still know and acknowledge that not all of our kids are performing at the level that they could be if given the right support and resources. And that's our job. As with any government entity, our job is to always make sure that we're doing better than we were the previous day. Getting towards a point where we can look back and say, we think we've arrived at a point where we feel comfortable, where everybody really does truly have that opportunity. And certainly when it comes to the resources, we know that some of our parents are afforded more resources than others. I count myself blessed as the son of a principal, but then also as now a parent who's engaged and involved in my child's school and knows the process, knows a few people who I can pick up the phone and say, hey, there's something that needs to be fixed. But the reality is that that doesn't happen with every single one of our parents, every single one of our students. Unfortunately, some of them don't even have a parent to call to say, hey, this is, so again, we need to make sure that we're addressing the disparities that we see, that we certainly are tackling some of the key issues, and working with our school system, working with our Board of Education, we can certainly make that happen. I'm going to turn to my colleagues for any opening comments they may have, and then I'll introduce our board members. So let me turn to Council President Navarro.
Thank you so much. I am really looking forward to this session. I think that it is so important to be able to really dissect and digest this report. I also want to say that, in all the years that I've been in public service, I started 2004 on the Board of Education. The Black and Brown Coalition meeting was truly, I think, a historic moment. And I really want to acknowledge Diego Ribudu and Byron Johns and everybody who worked together on hosting this particular event. I know former member of the board, Shirley Brandman, also worked very hard on this. The framing in the way that particular data points and asks were distilled, I think was very powerful. And I would venture to say that this is truly a turning point for us in the county. We have spoken for so long about the way that Black and Brown children are disproportionately affected by the academic achievement gap, and we have worked so hard to address all of these issues. Seeing the energy and the extraordinary participation of parents and young people owning this issue, I think it's just the beginning of a real, what I think it's a movement. So I'm, again, inspired and ready to redouble my commitment to get to the bottom of how can we facilitate that innovation and that reform that goes straight to the issues that were discussed. What are the barriers that still exist? Because we've been working on this for such a long time, and I, see current members of the board. I can, think of all the former members of the board, unions. I mean, we have all been working on this for a very long time. What is it that also we can start to look at vis-a-vis barriers? Is it at the state level? Are there particular barriers? Are there particular regulatory frameworks that impede that work? Is it just a newly found conversation with our employee associations about what does it mean to respond to all of these issues? I think that, again, that this is a movement, and what I realize is that for so long, sometimes you hear people say, that black and brown parents don't care about education and they're working 2 and 3 jobs and they don't show up. And so what you then end up with are a lot of people trying to speak on behalf of these communities. That day I saw the community speaking for themselves because they now have the information, they have the data, they're empowered, as they've always been, to advocate on behalf of their children. So I just say watch out for all of us, because this is kind of a new day, and I'm really excited about how can we then work together with you to identify what is that path that we need to follow, and how are we investing those resources, which are now quite significant, right? In order to achieve the outcomes that we know we have to achieve. So it's a very important moment as we're also discussing things like economic development for the county and positioning ourselves in a strategic framework of an economic development platform. It's all connected. It's all connected. So it's great. It's inspiring, and I'm really, really excited about this sort of next level of work. And being able, again, to identify how we get there. So thank you, Chairman, for hosting this session. I'm sure as we get through it, there might be future sessions that I would love for us to engage in to get a little more deeply into those barriers. But really want to acknowledge the work of the board and the superintendent and the community for getting us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And certainly when it comes to us framing the budget, that will certainly be a part of this discussion. So I know that we will have multiple conversations about the work that needs to be done, as many of them are interrelated to our budget negotiations that we have. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer and Council President. It's great to have the dynamic trio here, and then the others in the back, the Board of Education members who are here, and we've really, this is an exciting day. To have these 2 trains running at the same time, as we consider here at the Council racial equity legislation, this study coming out on the heels of the work that's been laid prior to this with the EOL standards and all the other stuff you've been doing so that we can have a full picture of where our students are and what we need to do. I think we are at a unique time in history, and we have the right leadership in place, both I think here in the council and what I refer to the best committee, all the time, and also on the school board and in the administration and the community partners, right? Because you really need all cylinders moving if you're going to get this done. That was evident to me sitting there last week, was that at different points in time we've had different people trying to take the lead, but to have all those engines kind of at the same time on the same page, singing from the same choir sheet, looking at the same data, is really exciting. Now we're going to have to sustain that momentum because we've had stops and starts before, but I really am hopeful about that opportunity to do that. And as we dig into this data, I think you know this already, you have fierce partners here in the council that want to make sure that we make progress on this. I've often talked about when I ran, it's unacceptable to me that the schools that I went to at New Hampshire States and Oakview are still some of the most challenged schools. And that's a story that we could look at across a whole range of schools. Now, has progress been made? Of course it has, but not quickly enough and not for enough of our students. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I just am really excited that we can lay this bare and have the parent advocacy, the community advocacy, and the leadership to really move this forward in the right way. So I look forward to getting into the details, but just want to commend the leadership of the board and the administration and my committee mates for having this discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Jawando, and I know that you really value this committee because you called me Councilmember Reamer, and that's okay. I know you were in Fed this morning, so it's okay.
Councilmember Rice.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. I know. Let me acknowledge our Board of Education members that are here. We have Board of Education member Smandrowski. Thank you so much. We have Board of Education member Jeanette Dixon. Thank you for being here, as well as Board of Education member Brenda Wolf. But I really want to thank all of our Board of Education members who've really been committed to this, of course, under the able leadership of our president, in really tackling some key issues that are going to address equity and opportunity in our schools. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the boundary study and what's going on there, because you have certainly unearthed some of those concerns in the community that run the same currents as what we've seen that have led to discrimination in our community, as well as inequities in our community. And I certainly would be remiss if I didn't say that there were people who espoused views at some of these meetings that directly tie to some of the things that we are trying to unravel via this equity study. And so it's a reminder that these challenges still befall our students, not just within our school system, but in our greater community as a whole, and ones in which it's even more the reason why we need to make sure that within our school system we try and eliminate as many of these as possible, understanding that they're still going to face them in their greater community. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Smith, to walk us through the presentation.
So I will ask Ms. Evans if she would like to start the presentation.
Sure. Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you so much for always just being willing partners. I am a very proud resident. I'm happy to be living in Montgomery County. I'm happy to be a parent of 2 children in the public school system, and then I'm happy as a board member that we have the relationship that we do with you. We want to always make certain that you're kept abreast of the work that we're doing, but it makes a huge difference that you want to know what we're doing. So just thank you for having us here. And then you're right, this work is really important. I think about the work that you're doing here at the county level around racial equity and social justice. It ties right in perfectly to the work that we're doing. You said it yourself, Council President Navarro, as well as Ms. Ruby Rubin said it at the Black and Brown Coalition. We've been at this for over 40 years. But I do want to say that the commitment that MTPS has didn't just start with the equity resource study that you're about to hear about today, nor did it start with the work that the county is doing. We've been doing this for over 40 years, and I believe that we're getting it right with this work that you're going to hear today. We have our all-in equity and achievement framework, which ties in perfectly to the resource study that was done. You know, we have our evidence of learning that's telling us whether or not our kids are learning. And how do we know? And then we have our equity accountability model that's saying, how do we know that they're learning and they're learning well? And this resource study is letting us know that if they're not learning, why are they not learning? That's helping us to answer the question. And so from this study, we had the information come to the board back in April. We've been having presentations since April. We had a presentation in June, and we had our last presentation September the 23rd. The board is really committed to this work, and one of the things that we wanted to make certain of is that the resource study that was done, that it didn't come back with recommendations, that it just came back with findings. We wanted to make certain that we were able to take the findings and engage our community in the work that we were going to do going forward, which is why I'm really proud about the work that the community has done around this work. They have taken a hold of it, and they have shared it much farther and wider than what we have in this short period of time. And you saw that evidence at the Black and Brown Education Forum on October the 15th. We're taking a look at the work being done in our schools, our individual schools, and seeing how we're making good use of our time, people, and our money. And then we're looking at the work that we're doing across the district. So I just want to say that it's a good time to be a resident, a student, a parent in our school system. And I'm just really proud and happy that I have colleagues on the board who also believe in equity and achievement for all our students. And you saw all of us, and as well as we saw you all, stand up and commit to this work and to the future. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Dr. Smith.
So as you noted, Chairman Rice of this committee, this is Dr. McKnight's first meeting with us, and I am particularly happy. I was happy when the board and I worked out that we would add this position to the system. I was happy when she was appointed on July 11th. I can only say that on October 21st, I am even more happy about the work that she is doing and the opportunity to work with her every day and together with the many, many other talented people in this school system. So I will turn over to her to make some opening comments, then we'll walk through this material.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for that compliment. Good afternoon, County Council members. It is a pleasure to be back home and here sitting before you today to talk about something that's critically important to our students and our communities. And Board Member Evans just said it's a good time. Well, it's definitely a great time to come back to Montgomery County Public Schools because all the right people are talking about the right thing that's going to make a difference for our students. And so I was thrilled to be able to come back in and come in on the heels of the study being completed. And then to be a part of operationalizing that into what it means in the context of Montgomery County Public Schools is truly an honor. So it's good to be here today. I just wanted to say the benefit that I found in this study is that it addresses something that I think we've struggled with in education in the context of systems all over the country, and it's that it's not a one-size-fits-all model that works. I've had the opportunity to work with actually all of you in different ways. President Navarro was actually on the Board of Education when I first became an administrator and, would come in and really have that conversation about understanding the stakeholders' voice. And I remember that being very meaningful to the community and just remembering that and knowing that there needed to be a follow-up to that every single day for every single child. As a principal at Ridgeview Middle School, Councilman Rice, to really talk about all the things in terms of where do we see equity, whether it came into technology use for students and all of those things. You were always a part of that conversation and trying to figure out how to be an advocate for schools. So it's nice to sit here and then begin these conversations with Councilman Jawando and say, okay, so, in your experience as a new county council member, having an interest in education in many different forms, what does all of this mean to you? So I think we all acknowledge that the one-size-fits-all model does not work, and we as a system have to do the very thing we ask our teachers to do, which is to differentiate for the needs of the schools. And in order for us to do that, we have to know the story of every single school and how we're serving it or how we may not be serving it to the best of our ability. And the ER study really gave us an insight to that as we continue to look at how we have organized and done things in the system and say what's leveraging supports for our students in a way that we're happy with and what's not. And that gets down to us better understanding the resource equity here in Montgomery County, which is what it's all built on. How we are using our resources tells us if we are making right decisions about how we're serving kids and communities. So with that said, I know the ER study looked at 11 different dimensions, and the ones that we focused on: teacher quality, instructional time and attention, rigorous empowering curriculum, diverse and inclusive schools and classrooms, whole child approach, and school leadership quality, are all the things that actually frame the experience that every single one of our students receive every day when they walk into our schools. And so what ERS afforded us was to be able to look at the lens of each of those dimensions and say, so look at what you're doing and learn from what we have learned about your school system, and then re-evaluate how you're doing and what you're going to do moving forward. And so again, out of that was born the Equity and Achievement Framework. And again, I'm just honored to be here at the table and be a part of working with all of the staff in the system who have, for years, been talking about this and thinking about ways that we go about the business of serving our children and operationalizing the learning from the study. So with that said, I'll say that I'm happy to be back, and I look forward to working with you.
So certainly, as chair of the committee, Mr. Rice, you and I have had the chance to work together over the last, now this is the 4th year, and I cannot say how much I've appreciated that opportunity to work with you in this, and I'm excited about this presentation today because it's kind of the, as Mr. Giwando said, the next big step. And certainly this year as County Council President, Councilmember Navarro, the work that you've done, the things you've called attention to over your career. And in fact, I just was talking to someone, they were talking about when you were on the board and how you used to move work forward and get things done on behalf of kids. And Mr. Giwando, you and I met when I
wasn't always popular, by the way.
I wasn't talking popularity. I was talking about getting things done.
Oh, I know. I appreciate that.
Yes. And Mr. Giwando, you and I met when I first came to this system, and your thoughtful, insightful comment and work on behalf of the school system is really appreciated, and now that's been amplified in this role. And so this is a bit of a landmark moment for me as I sit here in my 4th year, because 4 years ago, I started talking to Mr. Rice and Ms. Navarro about the evidence of learning. We're building a system. We'll be able to know. It's not perfect, because no human system is perfect. But it does tell us, to a degree, what we already knew, but it tells us in a way where we can look at each child, the entire system, and each student population in a way that makes sense and that we can understand the work that's in front of us. Because too often when people talk about achievement and learning, they talk about it as though children of color are not learning, and they are. In fact, as Ms. Evans said, the students of color in this county, the students who are in poverty in this county, from all of the measures, generally, on average, do better than their peers in the state or in the nation. Not always, but generally do better. So that's good. And we still have miles and miles to go before we sleep, is what it amounts to, because there's still disparities. There are still gaps. There are still areas. And this study was the next logical step as we looked at building the evidence of learning. Then we built the equity accountability model, which also it's not perfect. It has flaws in it. But at the end of the day, it gives us a clear, comparative way to talk about the impact of school on our students, all students and students by student population, and especially focused on students who've historically not had the same level of access, opportunity, or the same ratio of achievement as their peers. And we commissioned this study because we need to know what's happening across schools, across the system, within schools, and within programs in the way we use our resources. If we don't know that, we won't be able to take the next logical step. And it's only a study. The real work will get done now that we have the information. It doesn't tell us how to do the work, because if it can tell us how to do the work, then we would know something no one else in the world knows. You have to figure it out based on the context, the environment, and the circumstance you're in. And so I'm very excited because, Mr. Giwando, you said it very clearly. It kind of rounds out the whole picture. And then when you look at the Be Well 365 work and the work of this Board of Education, the board that I've known since I arrived here with a variety of different members, but the level of commitment in the strategic planning work they've done and in the work to push information out to the community and then make decisions based on that information, it bodes well for our future. It really does. And how we're doing the work. Dr. McKnight said it clearly. The most important words in this statement right here are resource equity is the allocation and use to create student experience. Allocation and use of anything and everything we use in the system to create student experience. Experience is how well am I doing? How well am I learning? How engaged am I in my school? How welcome do I feel? How much do I belong? What can I do when I walk off the stage with a diploma? What are my options? What are the choices I can make? And that's really what this work is all about for every single one of our 165,300 pre-K through 12th graders right now. And I might as well tell you, we gained about 2,750 students this year. We had been gaining between 2,000 and 2,400. Last year we dropped down to just over 1,000. I thought, okay, some relief. Well, it came back pretty intensely in July and August, and we gained over 2,700 students in this school year.
I was proud to give 2 of them to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I used to say when my 5 children were in school, I've done my part for enrollment. So, Dr. McKnight talked about the 11 dimensions of equity, and the ones that we looked at, the focus of the report, are made up there on the top of the grid in blue. And so I just want to dig in here to some of the summary of study insights. These will help us think about what do we do. So overall, MCPS outperforms other Maryland districts with similar levels of free and reduced meal students. However, not all student groups in MCPS experience this outperformance. Performance gaps still exist both across and within schools, particularly for students in poverty and students of color. We spend more money on our highest need schools, resulting in more staff per student at higher need schools, but the extra investment in high need schools is more than we see in other peer districts. So we spend more, and it's more than you see in districts that are relatively the same. However, we don't see that same level in this study at the middle and high school. And we'll look at that, and that's something we're concerned about and that we're going to focus on. In MCPS, focus group students are more likely than monitoring group students to spend time with novice teachers and less likely to spend time with teacher leaders, nationally board certified teachers, and teachers with advanced degrees. Principals report mixed results on practices related to teacher support and teacher collaboration. So they cause us to ask questions, and how do we respond to that as a school system and reduce the variability depending on which school you go to and increase the consistency of high-level service and experience for students. On average, higher need schools have lower class sizes than lower need schools, but there's variation in class sizes across schools. Some schools differentiate class size and time for priority subjects, grade levels, and students, but the practices are inconsistent. Enrollment in advanced course pathways decreases for all student groups over the course of elementary and middle school, suggesting that students are not getting the supports they need to succeed. Focus group students are less likely to be enrolled in advanced coursework, even compared to peers with the same incoming performance. That's causing a lot of question right now across schools as they review the students and the enrollment patterns because of the attention the resource study has drawn to this question. So not only who is assigned to teach whom and for what topics, but who actually gets access. Because if you ask me, am I a great gymnast? Then you'd have to say, well, no, I'm not. In fact, I would fail completely at gymnastics. And then you ask me, did you get any access to gymnastics training, education, learning, even play? Got none. You can never say somebody has a learning gap or an achievement gap if they've never had access. And then once they have access, if they don't get support to make real progress, then that's the second place that you have to check. If you do those two things, then performance changes. It's a result of what happens. So building access and opportunity through support and to make progress are key to what we need to do as we think about this, and this study also shows that. Students tend to be grouped in classes with peers of similar performance levels, limited access to heterogeneous classes. It's a real question in public education about that separation of students based on learning levels. And it's one that we've tried to move very hard, and we've had some success at the elementary and middle school level around enriched curriculum to move from a culture of scarcity to a culture of abundance. More opportunities across more schools, more time. That doesn't make everyone happy, but it should make everyone happy. And I would say strongly that when we build more opportunities and create more access, everyone wins in the community, everyone. And so that's a critical part of this. We've done that work at the elementary, middle, and we've done it at the high school level now in advanced placement and international baccalaureate. Critically important part of this conversation. And then when we look at the takeaways, we have to ask, how do students experience resources in MCPS? In what way does student experience differ across student groups? What does the data suggest about the underlying drivers of difference in student experience? What other hypotheses do we have? What are potential actions? What other questions does this data raise for me? I want everyone in every school and in the central office, in every office, be discussing these questions. How do they work? Because these become the drivers for resource allocation, for actions, for policy, for practice, for budget. And that's really the goal of this. When we look, we can look at school systems across the state, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but once again, you see that Montgomery County, for all of its size, does well when you look at the level on average of poverty and performance. Now, Worcester and Queen Anne and Carroll are a bit above. Calvert and Howard are about the same, but maybe a bit above. Frederick looks like it's right on par when you look at that. And we have higher levels of poverty than all of those school systems except Worcester, which is a very small school system at Ocean City, as you know. The issue here, though, is that it is possible for us to meet the needs of students. And it is possible to raise this higher, because poverty, while a factor, while a challenge, is not your destiny as a student. And it should not be, and it cannot be. And if we do our work, we can really significantly mitigate that. Now you say, how do you know that? How can you prove that? I can show you on the equity accountability model the variation among schools right here in Montgomery County, where they'll have the same level of poverty and significantly different performance for students. So it's possible to do it more consistently if we do our work. And this is not an indictment of the teachers or the principals or the support professionals. This is a call to action for all of us to do it consistently. When we look at this, this was a bit shocking for a lot of our staff members, many have been here many, many years, decades. When we look at Montgomery County for our non-poverty Asian and white students, that's those two tall bars way over on the side, 75% and 62%. This is Prince George's County as compared to Montgomery County on the Park English Language Arts 3 through 8 tests. Montgomery County, for those groups of students, those are white students, Asian students, and students of two or more races, does profoundly better than just about anybody around. When you look along everywhere the dark blue bar is, you see that it does better until you get to our students of color in poverty, African American students and Hispanic Latino students. That right there tells a very, very powerful story of what we need to be doing. We want these bars to grow, all of them across the system, so they're all at the same level, a high level, and we've got to pay attention to what happens with those 5 focus groups that are identified in the equity accountability model every day, all the time, as readers, writers, listeners, speakers, and in their mathematical reasoning. Now you may say, why don't you care about social studies and science and world language and arts and all that? I do. If you can't read and write and you don't have mathematical reasoning skill that supports your work in mathematics, you are hampered. And this report shows that. When you get to the upper levels, you don't have the same number of options and opportunities and choices as students who are meeting the grade level curriculum standards at those levels. And that's what we've got to do. That's the work right there in one slide. And it's one of the most powerful pieces of information. And then you say, well, That's the PARC test. Okay, it's the PARC test. I can overlay all of our multiple measures and show you generally the same story. That's why I say it's flawed, because no one test tells the story. We don't use one test. The study used one test because it allows to compare across the state. But you cannot deny that no matter what set of measures you're using, you see generally the same story. But when we use multiple measures, we give kids more opportunities to demonstrate what they know and can do. That's particularly important. We have 3 schools the study calls out in this.
Dr. Smith,
Yes,
give me one second.
please.
Councilmember Joando had a question
Yes,
about the last
please.
slide.
And just very specific, because I know we want to hold most to the end. Is this consistent over the last several years? Did they look at, outside of 2018 PARC reading scores, this synergy or almost the same levels for poor Black and brown students in Prince George's versus Montgomery? Did they look past 2000 or before 2018?
No, they
Okay.
did not. You only have PARC back to 2014 when it was introduced. And so you have a really short trend line there to use for PARC. I would tell you that I would predict that I'm confident.
I'm sure it's similar,
consistent,
but I
yes.
just didn't know if there's a
Yeah.
way. To people who might say, oh, well, the test is, to your point of the test. I mean,
Yeah.
but you have other ways to show similar.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Some similar circumstances.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we can look at trend lines in other areas. For example, the school system has been using the MAP test in reading and mathematics for years, and we do look at those trend lines for individual schools and grade levels, and we see the same facts exactly. And these 3 schools were called out in terms of significantly higher performance than their similarly situated schools, Wheaton Woods, Highland, and Matsunaga. And that really just calls out that we should be doing the work everywhere. And while they show themselves in similarly situated schools, what we want to see is everybody at the top. So the goal is not just to be better than the other schools like you, the goal is to be at the top in terms of, and not because we want to say we're number 1, but because when you can say that all of your students are learning, then you know that you're meeting your mission and you're doing what's expected of you as a school system by the community and the individuals in this county and what they expect. When we look at these issues, these are really interesting slides. I'm not ready to declare this is the case, but I think they're pretty indicative of what happens when you look at the equity accountability model, when you look at data over time in MAP. What it says is that in lots of school systems, children of color and children in poverty do better if they're in lower poverty schools. That doesn't happen to the same degree, the researchers found, as it does happen to some degree, you can see there, a rather small degree. But the claim is, and I would want to do more research, the claim is that it happens more significantly in other places. And I will tell you, in my business, it's the belief system. People will say, well, if you go to a school with, University of Maryland put out a study that said 25% or smaller percentage of the students are identified as in poverty, it's highly desirable. And this says, in our school system, it doesn't appear to have at initial look have the same effect for students or to the degree. So that's a question, something we're really going to want to question deeply. I'm going to not go through all of these, obviously, I'm just hitting certain ones. Yes, please.
That's President Navarro.
Yeah, so that last comment that you just made, that last finding, how much is that, do you think, related to what has been researched regarding just the culture of the schools, right? And how, Black and brown children tend to really value this issue of relationship building with, teachers. And so how do you think that plays into that last data point?
I think the relationships generally, and I've been in all of the schools multiple times now, the relationships are very strong and generally very positive. People can certainly find an outlier, that is not consistent with that, without a doubt, multiple outliers. What I will tell you is there has been a historical focus here on success being identified around, and I say this as an outsider looking in for many years from another school system, as an outsider from the State Department, so I'm not just speaking carelessly. And I say this on purpose, even though it's not it's not the most positive thing to say, frankly. There was a very strong focus on college admission and college attendance for many years in Montgomery County, especially competitive and highly competitive colleges. And we heard a young man speak the other night about going to Montgomery College and how that wasn't as valued in his school, and yet he wasn't necessarily encouraged to go to a different school. I don't think that's the common practice, but I believe as a student who grew up in poverty and never had anyone encourage me to go to college, let alone even a community college, that you do as a student know and understand what's valued around you. And if you don't fit that, oftentimes you withdraw or push back or give up. And I think that has been something that the system has taken on over the last several years, but it's been a long cultural belief system that the equivalent of success was going to a competitive or highly competitive college, and anything less is less successful. And I think that's something we have to change. We want kids to go wherever they want to go. I use this story often. If I'm in the 11th grade, and this could have happened to me if I'd grown up in Maryland, and I went to my counselor and said, or a teacher or a member of my neighborhood anywhere, and said, you know, I really want to go to College Park. They could have said to me, and it would have been accurate, well, Jack, you know, I don't think you have the GPA to go to College Park, and you haven't taken the upper level math. You're not going to get into College Park. So what do you want to do instead? As opposed to this statement, well, Jack, that's entirely possible for you to go to College Park. No problem. It's probably going to mean that you're going to go to Montgomery College for a year or two and raise your GPA, take those requisite math classes. And by the way, Jack, did you know that if you go to Montgomery College and actually get an Associate of Arts degree, you can walk on to College Park? You don't have to apply. You don't have to be admitted. If you get that Associate of Arts and you're in good standing, Maryland community colleges have open access to our university system. Hear the difference in those two statements? I believe we've got to move fully to the second one. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're headed in the right direction.
Right, and that was my observation, because what we're talking about here really is a culture change, right? So for an institution of this size to work towards that particular culture change, because some of the things that were shared in this particular event are things that I have heard time and time again,
That's right.
things that my children went through, her friends went through, the same exact thing that was shared. And so, you know, I'm going to be interested in figuring out how does one change that culture, and how does one change it to the degree that precisely, even if you send low-income Black and brown children to low farm school, if they're not doing as well, is it because there's something in that culture of that school that's just not resonating with these Black and brown faces as they're walking into that classroom, right? We, you know, research to say that students, you know, especially Black and brown, when they walk into a classroom in the first 15 minutes, know if you have high expectations for me or you don't. And so that piece, which is one that we've talked to for so long, it's something that I know it's going to have to be front and center for how we change the culture in a school system that is majority of color. So again, it's not as if we're talking about a nice to do. It's kind of like what we have to do.
No.
So yeah, so just that data point just really jumped at me.
Right, absolutely. I mean, let's just be blunt. It's a moral imperative for the individual student, and it's a collective good for the economic, social well-being of this community.
We have no choice.
That's right. And we've spent this is our 4th year of working at the high school level with equal opportunity schools, which is all about belonging. And we've seen our participation by students of color go up across the system in our high schools. The challenge, though, is what about the students who get, and they're almost entirely, not entirely, but almost entirely African American, Black, Hispanic, Latino students who get to the 9th grade and aren't prepared to take advantage of those opportunities. So we have to change both places. We have to change what happens in culture
Yeah.
and learning levels, pre-K 8, and we have to change what happens in the sense of belonging and the support 9 through 12. And we're headed in the right direction. And so much good work has been done here, as Ms. Evans said, for decades, that the foundation, all the pieces are in place. How do we coalesce that around to be more consistent, reduce the variability, have higher expectations for all kids, and higher levels of support for all kids? Those are the key questions. Ms. Evans or Dr. McKnight, anything you want to share on that topic?
I was hoping you'd ask Dr. Smith, because it raises such an important conversation. I think what that slide resonates, or what it lifts up for us is that we've got to do several things at the same time. And Dr. Smith talked about making sure we look at that K-8 experience and look at the teaching and the learning and all of the things that impact the learning experience that a student has. At the same time, when we talk about building a school culture or a system culture, you have to think about how you're doing that or planning that for the people who are currently in the system and helping them to understand what that looks like today, right now, maybe compared to what it may have looked like for them as an employee 10, 15 years ago. So that's a certain set of work that has to take place at the same time when we are norming every single new employee who comes into the system to understand the culture that has to exist in how they go about their work or how they interact with students and what they provide for them, so that we don't create a larger gap in understanding what the expectations of the culture is and making sure we're working on it simultaneously. So I think that's a big part that we have to continue to look at. What's needed right now, and what do we do to calibrate all of our current spaces in MCPS to create that culture that's needed while we're onboarding everyone coming into MCPS, so then it just becomes a norm. And we're not having this conversation about how do we get there at some point in time. You know, it should all be the same.
Right, and I mean, as has been stated for so long, the good news is that because it is a very high-functioning system, then we can do this. You know, the fear is that when systems begin to deteriorate, then it's quite impossible, even if you throw a lot of money at it, right? So I think that to me is kind of the focus, is that we are in that inflection point in the county on many different policy areas, but in this particular one, I always say the good news is that we have strong fiscal indicators in the county right now, strong institutions, but still a lot of gaps that continue to affect us. And unless we really kind of hone in on what we're going to do, eventually it can begin to really affect the overall direction of the county. So this is such important work at this time. Okay.
Councilmember Giovanna?
Thank you. And following the council president's lead, obviously, to be extremely blunt, you were a little blunt, I'll be extremely blunt. That last slide is at the crux of the boundary study debate, at the crux of many debates we have here in the county that are had at kitchen tables about where's my child going to go, where am I going to live, what am I going to do, what kind of experience is my black or brown child going to get, either worried about cultural competency if they go to a lower performing school. If I can opt in, if I'm a middle class African American parent or Latino parent and I can live in some place where there's going to be zoned to a lower poverty school, can I be sure that my child will get the type of language training and expectations and all the things that Council President Navarro mentioned? Or if I'm a high poverty student and I have no choice about where I live because I'm just looking for affordable housing, are my students or my children going to get what they need in that school? And so I think that slide that shows that it wasn't significantly higher as we think about the boundary study and where we want to focus our time and our resources. I say this all the time in Montgomery County. We're looking at this in the environmental debate. Where can we get our most bang for our buck in reducing CO2 emissions? We can't do everything. And so we see it all the time, whether it's in Chicago or we get these Black Joy emails and texts about the all poverty school where 100% of the kids graduated and they're all going to college or to a training school. They're going to post-secondary. kids can learn if they have expectations and they have the resources, and the teachers and leaders in that building have the supports they need no matter where they are. And so I think that's a huge discussion we're going to have to, I know you know this, but I think for the public, for the millions, as I often say, watching at home, and there's people have angst about it. What are we going to do with this information? And so I think that is a critical slide that obviously needs more discussion and research, and I just appreciate you calling it out the way you did.
So I'm going to put a point on this and wrap up the conversation by saying we see it. We see it, and I see it anecdotally. So both of my daughters went to Spark Matsunaga, and then their middle school is Kingsview. Kingsview had a performance plan to get themselves and right their ship. And when Anaya was coming through, my oldest was coming through, she was going into Kingsview at the height of this. I will tell you that there was a pause for a moment to say, okay, so we're going to have to work through this. But the reality is that, again, being around, and I think that this is what we need to have the conversation about, being around children of varying circumstances is not a negative thing. Unfortunately, our school system is dealing with parents who believe that not to be the case. They somehow believe that being around children who are of lower socioeconomic means, who may get lower grades than they do, somehow means that it's going to be to the detriment of their children, and it has no effect on them at all. High-performing students who go to school with lower-performing students, there's never been any data that says that those high-performing students do any worse. None, right? And so, again, as we're talking about boundary studies, as we're talking about parents and where they choose, as we have this conversation about Seneca Valley, shame on people who are being afraid to send their child to Seneca Valley, to a brand new high school with CTE programs and all the accoutrements that many other schools don't, just for the sheer sake of the fact that some of those kids aren't getting what they need to be successful. It has nothing to do with what their kids are going to have. It has that with those kids, we're not giving them everything they need to be successful. And if they got that, they would be successful too, just like their kids. But yet they want to make a decision based on what and how we're not doing for all of the other kids. And so therefore that somehow is going to impact them. Shame on them for that, because that's not right. And again, if we are going to get this right, all of that has to come into play. What the council president said, what Councilmember Jawando said in terms of changing the paradigm, changing the conversation. And we have to be bold enough to take on that discussion and say, that ain't right. That's not how it works. That is not what the data shows us. That is not at all what happens. There are not kids who go to our school seeking to fail. There are not kids who go to our school seeking to be stuck in poverty. That is not why they go to school. If they're showing up in those doors, if they're actually in their classrooms, in those seats, it's because they want something better for themselves. That's what it's about. So we welcome that, and we need to meet them there. We need to make sure that we're giving them all that they need, and that can happen at a high poverty or a low poverty school. Poverty does not determine, and I'll just say this, Congressman Cummings said something to me a long time ago. He said, you know, we need to keep reminding people not to let surroundings determine their future. That's it. Back to you, sir.
Well, that's absolutely true, and you both make very good points that we celebrate schools where students who experience poverty also experience tremendous success. We make movies about them. We write magazine articles about them. We need to replicate them everywhere, and we can do that if we're committed to it. And Seneca Valley, by the way, will have a full range of career programs, but it will also have International Baccalaureate, advanced placement, every arts, everything you possibly could want. I would be proud and excited if any of my 6 grandchildren got to go.
I'm trying to figure out how I can get my daughter Kaylin in there.
Well, let's not have that conversation. So when we talk about funding, though, it's really interesting to look at the funding, and these are all comparatives. But when you look at Montgomery County's investment in students with poverty and English learners, it drives spending up across all levels. And you do see it is higher, significantly higher in the elementary school. And we're going to need to address this at the middle and high, especially the middle school, as we think about new models for middle school experience for students. The world has changed. At one time, it was junior high school. My wife was born in Montgomery County and moved away from Montgomery County at the end of 7th grade when she moved to Washington with her family, where I met her some years later when we were in college. And it's interesting because she went to Redland Junior High School when it first opened in the 7th grade. That model was the model then. We've moved to middle schools, which was like a half step toward the developmental appropriate school for middle school students. We've got to be thinking about this in terms of how we do this. And you know, if we do it right and we take care of these two, then the high schools will be much less necessary to be staffed differently and those sorts of things. Because if everyone walks into the 9th grade fully ready, then we'll have many, many fewer students who moved in here after elementary school or in the end of middle school that we'll need to support through a different kind of high school experience or that sort of thing. So if we can do what we need to do here in elementary and middle, we can make all the difference for students in high school and for our high schools, providing real complete opportunities for every student. The other thing that is interesting here is literally a month and a half from right now, the state board will be releasing the state report card for every school in the state. And for the first time ever, these numbers for each school will be on that report card. The actual per pupil amount spent, not the budgeted amount, not the system average, but the actual amount spent. And that goes to some of the other questions that this study evokes as we go through it. So this funding is very interesting, and it challenges us to think about all of our school levels, but especially elementary and middle school, and especially for students who are in English learner programs. And if you'll notice on this slide, it says special education is excluded from these numbers, because that can really change the actual amount for a student, because we do spend more there. In fact, if you look at some of this data in this slide, in this set of slides, you'll see that. But around English learners, it does ask the question about what we're doing at the middle and high school level. Because, for example, there were over 1,000 students still part of the English learner program when they graduated last year from high school. Over 1,000. But there were 32,000 ever ESOL. The vast majority of our English learners leave elementary school, if they're in our elementary schools, without needing any English learner support. The vast majority of our students in high school leave ESOL in middle school if they come to us in 2nd or 3rd or even 4th grade. So the question we have to ask is, what's the best level of service? What's the value we can add to our students' experience when they come to us needing to acquire English and, in the best case scenario, become fully literate and ready to operate in this economy and society in both languages or 3 languages? So it asks a lot of questions. And then when you look at this one, you see the teacher compensation between higher and lower needs school represents $32 million system-wide. Well, this has to do with the years of experience of a teacher. And that's not a bad thing, but it's something we have to think about as we think when we get to the next section about teaching quality. And this one, oops, I went a little too fast, just shows a very vivid picture of the staffing based on whether it's a Title I school, a focus school, or a non-focus school. So you can see at the elementary level, it's pretty considerable. It's not nearly as significant at the middle level, and this is an area I'm very concerned about, because that's the gateway to high school and life right there. Kids don't decide at 18, what am I going to do about college? Do I want to go or not? They might decide if they want to wait out a year, but we really have to be capturing their hearts and minds and building their skill levels as they enter 6th grade to be really fully ready. And if they're still struggling, to get to that proficiency level in mathematics and reading, you cannot get that done in middle school. So we have to, you know what I mean? You can't do both in middle school. You can't be building proficiency and moving kids toward accelerated programming and higher level opportunities at the same time. So that's just something I wanted to point out as an area.
Council President Navarro had a question.
Yes,
on that. Yep.
absolutely.
Dr. Smith, in terms of middle school, have you been able to glean, and I know that the middle school, whole school magnet consortium was not obviously implemented at Fidelity after after the federal grant ran out. But have there been any best practices or just any learning from the whole school magnet that could be, since that was supposed to be the template for the middle school reform, which, then resources became so tight and
Right.
other decisions were made. But has that been something that you've studied to see whether you can glean any best practices as you're looking at this middle school question?
I'm so glad you asked that question because actually at two of our schools, some of the schools that were the grant-funded magnet continue on, like Loiterman and Parkland and Argyle. And then a couple of schools are implementing a program that one of our principals, Dr. Robbie Dodd, started at Argyle. So I think the answer to this question is in the combination of these two things. At Argyle and now at White Oak, they run a very small targeted program called Project Success. And we've asked our Office of Research to study this.
Okay.
And I've looked at Dr. Dodd's research. And I really think that model of relationship and how they build the system makes such good sense, and all of our middle schools would benefit from it, certainly the ones that have higher levels of students in poverty. And so that's something that we're working on and thinking of. When you take that and add it to the intense focus and level of engagement at Argyle, Parkland, and Loiterman around their three areas of interest, I think that it shows clearly that if you have the adult and student construction for relationships and engagement, and then you have the topic of interest, so it's not just pure disciplinary work like English and social studies and
Right.
science, but they're engaged, I think that's the key, and that's our next big body of work that we need to engage in the next couple of years. It really is. And I think that can literally change the experience of both students and adults in middle schools. And there are some emerging models across the country that I've now had the chance to look at where they're doing this sort of work. And I think that's going to make a significant difference. And so you will begin to see these things emerging in the coming budget cycle in terms of planning and setting it up so that we could implement in 21, 22, 23.
Got it.
And we've been able to do a lot of good work at the high school level around high school programming, and we've done a lot of work at the elementary level around the curriculum and access. It's the middle school that we've got to really tackle right now so
Right.
that we can benefit from that elementary work and then have everybody engaged at the high school level.
Right.
Yeah.
And that has been sort of a gap for a while, right?
Yes.
We've been saying that the middle school reform piece has been one that we've got to address now for a little while.
Yep,
So.
that's a great topic of conversation for
Yeah.
this conversation today, yeah. So teaching quality is one I want to spend a few minutes talking about. People think, well, this is how good is the teacher? No. You can be a novice teacher and be phenomenal. You can be a highly experienced teacher or somewhere between novice and be phenomenal. This is not about the individual teacher. We want every student to have access to a really strong, effective, relational, content-driven teacher, principal, media specialist, counselor, everybody in the building. What this looked at are what are the attributes that you find in a critical mass in schools. So, you find in some schools in our system and in many schools in this nation a critical mass of very new to the profession teachers in schools with higher levels of poverty and higher numbers of students of color. That's what it says. It says you find fewer teachers with national board certification, with really extensive credentials and education, teaching our students at the entry-level courses, like the difference between AP Calculus and Algebra 1. So it doesn't mean that a highly experienced, highly skilled teacher shouldn't teach only advanced placement calculus, but it does call into question why they aren't teaching both, especially in a school building where there are lots of new teachers that would benefit from an old guy like me or a very senior teacher, as a more polite way to put it, to sit down and talk with the new teachers who are also teaching Algebra 1. And I will say my teaching experience in 1980, I was given 4 sections a day, so most of my day, of all students who had failed English 1 or more times. So I've been teaching about 1 hour, and I have the students with the most need in the school all day, every day, for the next 5 years. And it's not that I didn't teach them, I did. In fact, I figured out how to say to them, okay, we're going to play the credit game today. I have the credit, you want the credit in English. Let's figure out how to learn some English, get some skills together, and then you can graduate with your class on time. But that's not the way it should be consistently or all the time or everywhere. We've got to figure out systems to do that, and I'm really pleased that the staff, the association, everybody has said, yeah, how can we figure this out while ensuring that our teachers can choose if they want to teach in Montgomery County, let alone which school they are willing to go to. So we have to dignify and respect them, but how can we incentivize it and create an atmosphere and a culture and a mission in a school where people want to go there and want to stay there? And I've been very excited in the last 2 months at the many conversations I've had with the leadership across all the different sectors in education. I feel very, very positive about making some movement in this area because it just, when I was at the State Department as the Chief Academic Officer, US Ed sent something out and said, this is a national emergency. When you just look across the states at the number of beginning teachers who are teaching our students who need the most effective teacher. We have students who I have 5 kids. 2 of them really didn't need a lot from the teacher. 1 needed something, and then my 2 youngest boys who were adopted were English learners and received special education services. They needed the support and help of teachers every day. And thank goodness they got it, and now they're 29 and 31 years old and doing well in life. But that's critical that happen. And that's what this whole section is about when we look at teaching quality. Novice is not a bad thing. Too much of anything, I would say it's probably not a good idea if you have an entire faculty made up of 30-year veterans. Mm-hmm. They need some young people around to say, hey, why you do that? So anyway, Mr. Rice.
I was giving a lot of thought to this after the Black and Brown Forum. Because just thinking back to my mother, who was a principal and supervised teachers, but was a teacher before that, and then university administrator, and I've never heard of a principal or an administrator saying, no, you can't teach that class. And so part of it is trying to understand why it is that more of our highly skilled, highly qualified teachers are choosing to just teach the higher level courses than the beginning level courses. Because I couldn't imagine a principal saying, no, Mr. Smith, I'm not going to let you teach, geometry, or I'm not going to let you teach, entry-level math. I just don't see that happening. And so part of it is getting to the underlying cause of why it is that our teachers are choosing to go in that direction, if it seems consistent. Now, it's not always the case, obviously, but for some, and I'd really like to find out more about that. And I guess I see that we have MCA here, so it's certainly one in which we can ask those questions and identify why it is that we see our teachers that are typically more highly qualified and more experienced that are choosing to go for the higher level class than the entry level class where they can do the most good. I will say, one of the other interesting things that I think about when it comes to teacher quality as a whole also, and this is something that we spend a lot of time talking about with the Kerwin Commission, and really is the underlying challenge about our teachers as a whole and what it is that they do, and having more of them that are of the highly qualified, highly caliber teachers. Because here's the thing, it's expensive to go to school, regardless of what you go to school for. So I'm going to touch on two things here because I think it's important as we frame what we're about to go into when it comes to teacher quality, because it shapes both of them. We're talking about growing diversity. If you grow up in the inner city and you grew up with a single parent who worked 2 jobs to take care of you and your brothers and sisters and struggled to put food on the table and make sure that you had everything, and guess what? You, just like we're talking about in the example, did not let your surroundings determine your future and crusaded and did well all throughout school, and you got straight A's and you got accepted to all these schools, right? And you know what's happening in your community and you know that you could do good there, but you also know you have 2 other brothers and sisters who could certainly benefit from you making a lot of money and being able to take care of them, and mom who took care of you and did everything for you. And so when you're faced with the choice of whether you want to become a teacher and make this, or you want to go into, the medical profession and make this, why do we set people up like that? That's part of the challenge. And we've never paid our teachers commensurate with the level of instruction, because to assume that just because a person goes into the teaching profession doesn't mean that their cost of school is any cheaper, that they don't have to get master's degrees and any of the other kinds of things that other professions do, but yet we pay them less than their counterparts who require the same amount of schooling. If we don't address and tackle that issue, we will continue to have the problems. But at the same time, we do need to expect that our teachers who are doing that are also doing the most good for where we need them the most, right? And so it goes, that sword cuts both ways. So we've got to do our part when it comes to ensuring that we're paying teachers commensurate with the level of experience and schooling that they need to become teachers and highly qualified teachers. But also at the same time, we also have to ask that they give us and contribute to us where we need them the most. And so it's both of those things, I think, that cut into this conversation around teacher quality. And I know is certainly something that the Bracken Brown Forum brought up when it highlights the fact that we don't see that represented. We don't see those highly qualified teachers as represented when it comes to our lower income students. So we've got to do a better job of that. And so whatever it is in eliminating the barriers that may exist, or whether it's talking about ways in which we can continue to implore to them that this is where we need them the most and where they can do the most good, all of those kinds of things need to be a part of that overall conversation.
So I just have to say, I want to remember this conversation and recall it when we're talking about the budget in 4 months from now on. That'll be very important.
No, thank you.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you right now, you look, just like last year, we thanks to
Thank you.
Council
Yes,
President,
for last year. That's right.
we found the money. So, we in Montgomery, we always find the money. Councilmember Jawando.
That's gonna be on a yard sign. We find the money. Councilmember Rice. So just real quickly, because I know we want to move through these. Did planning time for teachers factor into a measure? Was that measured in any way in this study? Let me just say that.
No, it was not measured in the study in that way. This was really the integration of student learning and how we spend the money.
Right.
And so if you looked at planning time, you would see that in Montgomery County, we do have significantly more planning time than most other school systems in the state and in the nation. Not all, but most others. But it is always a question because the planning time, the difference in planning time or time needed to support students who have a real significant learning needs versus those who have much better life infrastructure
Right.
through their family and community.
And
Those
that
are-
was the point I was getting
that's
at.
right.
I mean,
Those-
access for the students, for teachers that had that time. You
Yep.
know, because we talk about not only teacher pay, but burnout, educational load.
Yep.
You know, it's harder, and we acknowledge that. That's why we fund, to some extent, higher levels, you know, and,
Right.
and so that's obviously baked into some of what we do. But I think there's a strong argument to make that that is impacting the type of planning time, the type of time that our teachers are getting in the highly impacted schools, right? And what those students are then getting downstream, a teacher who's had to deal with, you know, 10 other things that the teacher in the other place. So you have a novice teacher dealing with 20 extra things potentially than the experienced teacher across the district. And I just think we have to keep that in mind as well as we go forward, because, you know, as we're heading into the budget, money is important, but leadership's important.
That's right.
Time for planning, support, that's equally as important for the teachers as it is for the students. And so, and I know you know this, but I just think it bears in mind when I look at this, because we are losing we're stressing out a lot of folks because of when you go to that middle school chart, this is directly connected to that.
Yes.
If you have a highly impacted middle school and you have teachers doing their best and they have less support staff, that impacts all of this in their experience for the students. So I know you know that, but I just think it bears out how all these things are interconnected. And a lot of them have budgetary implications. But I'm glad that we're bringing it out in this form.
Well, thank you for saying that, because they are critically important to how we can actually reach the goals and the desired state that we're discussing right here. Absolutely critical to this conversation. So this particular slide, I'm not very good at technology at all.
I'm
So this-
sorry, I apologize. Council
Oh,
President
sorry.
Navarro.
No,
Yes.
just one.
Yeah.
I mean, just one last observation, because I'm reminded of the critical decision that the previous council had to make in 2016 during budget with the property tax increase. And after a lot of conversations with a lot of teachers and with a lot of parents, et cetera, it was very clear, at least to the council, that we needed those additional resources, especially when it came to issues of reducing class sizes, because a lot of the conversation had to do with how can I relate to my student? How can I best get to know the student? How can I best find time for planning if I have a classroom of this size? And so I just wanted to reiterate that, because that's very recent history, and it had a lot of political ramifications, right? And so looking forward, the same kind of circumstances and those same types of conversations and whatever it was that was done to ensure that our teachers, did not have such a stressor in the classrooms trying to deliver everything with, higher class size. All of those things have to be taken into consideration. I don't foresee the council doing something similar anytime soon. But, so I think as we have these conversations, it's also important to understand, how were those additional resources put into place strategically in order to get us to this desired state that we're talking about, right? Because that's the question that I know we get asked all the time. And so how do we articulate that? And sometimes when I even hear teachers say, well, my classroom is still the same, et cetera, how do we respond to that? So I just wanted to interject and just mention that, because that was a significant decision that came out of precisely what this exchange was all about. I mean, that's what really led everybody to hold hands together and make that decision.
Yeah. No. So this particular slide just shows you by student population, the one that's on the screen, kind of what the experience is for students with novice teachers. And once again, they are averages. So then you have to go, each individual school has to look. And by the way, each individual school has this same information for just their school. That was part of this study, because we want to make sure they can be thinking and talking and asking questions simultaneous to the system thinking and talking and asking questions, not wait 3 years and the system has to do all of these things with it. We can all be working all the time and thinking on this. This looks at, for example, the experience of students across schools and within schools. And once again, what we see is that across schools, there are decisions and ways of doing business that we can consider. And within schools, going back to the assignment of teachers, that is a principal's responsibility. But when we say that, it is a collective effort. As a longtime principal in a school, as well as being a teacher in an English department, the department chair, the resource teacher, the teacher leaders, everybody works on this together. And so it's really a raising awareness and making sure that everybody is working on this together. And, Mr. Rice, I just have to say, I cannot imagine a world where if I went as an upper level teacher at the high school or middle school level teaching the most accelerated students and said, please, Mr. Rice, my principal, would you let me teach some of the students who most need a teacher because I can be there, that they would ever be refused. Can't imagine that world. So, I think you make a very powerful point. So that's really what we're looking at, and these all show different ways of showing teacher quality. Instructional, how are we doing on time here? Instructional time and attention really looks at how many students are in classes, in core subjects, and it looks at what the access is in schools. So for example, if we look at this slide right here, you can see average English language arts and math class size by student incoming performance at the high school, English language arts 9th and 11th grades and math 9th grades only. And you can see the students' incoming performance scores and then what happens. And so typically if students have smaller, if they have lower performance, like the one, they have smaller classes. That's on average. The challenge here is to get greater levels of consistency and, as Councilmember Navarro said, drive those class sizes down overall, and especially for students who are in poverty. That's critically important. And this also looks at quite an interesting slide here. This looks at students in 9th grade who have lower incoming performance occasionally get differentiated time in English language arts, but current schedules leave little opportunity for additional time in math. Now, this is a huge argument. This doesn't say we ought to be putting students in math 3 hours a day. The idea of having extended time in math, which then removes something else from your schedule, but it asks the question, what do we do in mathematics, especially at the elementary and middle school, so when students reach high school, they don't need additional time in mathematics to meet the standard of completing Algebra 1 or have it completed in middle school, of meeting the high school assessment requirement for graduation, and then being fully ready to go on to that upper level math, which does control about 40 to 50% of the career pathways in our society, by the way. When we talk about the jobs that are unfilled, a vast majority of them have some level of mathematical reasoning that you must bring to the position. And that's a Montgomery County issue, and one we ought to be working on and thinking about all the time, and we are. And one of our board members said, we've been talking about math forever. And I said, I know, and you're right, and I understand, and we still have to talk about it. We have to talk about it until we figure it out, and I'm convinced we can figure it out in Montgomery County if it can be figured out in this country. I am. We just have to figure it out at the elementary, middle level in support of high school opportunity. Was there a...
Councilmember Giovanni?
And if we had extended day, extended year, like in the middle school that several of us visited earlier this year, you could do that, couldn't you?
Yes, you could do more.
And I just want to put that marker down. Mm-hmm. I think for our high needs students, for the less amount of staff that we had in the middle school, for our focus on middle school, that type of model, I know we need the data. We need that first because we need to be responsible stewards of money to make sure that it is yielding what I think it will yield from what I've seen, and I think what you all have seen already. But that might be a 21 budgetary item, but I just want to encourage you, as I know you are, continue looking at those models and the mindfulness of obviously that's happening there too, but removing some of that pressure and stress of having to squeeze everything in and being able to do it in a more deliberative way and to take the time when people feel to have that differentiated instruction. I think is going to be critical to our middle school success. And I know you can comment on that, but I think you share my view.
I absolutely share your view. I mean, if you think about it, and this is something that's been discussed in this business for a long time, we have made learning the variable and time the constant. We say you get 90 days a semester. Instead, we need to make learning the constant. You need to learn to hear. You need to get to this level of learning minimum, and time ought to be the variable. And the more we can do that, the more I think we can flip what you're talking about. And certainly for elementary and middle school students, more time in school is critically important, especially in communities that do not have lots of resources and families for summer programs, summer camp, summer experiences. Summer is not a great time for many of our students, even though we all think of it, like it's wonderful. It's not, and we gotta pay attention to that for many of our students. So the next area of work is in rigorous empowering curriculum, and this looked at what the size of the classes are and how we do those classes. Now, what's the content in the curriculum, and what's the access level and learning level? And the first thing it takes on is looking at mathematics and the different pathways. And that is a particularly interesting way to look at those pathways. But when you get over to this slide, what you see by student population, and 7th grade algebra is not the goal. 7th grade algebra is an opportunity for students who are fully ready developmentally and to do that. But I truly believe that talent is equally distributed across the population. Opportunity is not. And this slide right here says that. It says that what's happened from pre-K through 6th grade matters tremendously for all students, and it matters more for some students than others. And that's what we got to pay attention to. 8th grade by Algebra 1 by the end of 8th grade, there is absolutely nothing wrong with a student who needs to take Algebra 1 in 9th grade. But that student needs to be fully prepared to take Algebra 1 in 9th grade rather than being ill-prepared. And that's where we have to get to. We have drastically increased the number of students who are successfully completing Algebra 1 by the end of 8th grade in the system, and those students are almost entirely students of color and students in poverty. And they're meeting the high school graduation requirement. They're taking Algebra 1 and getting a grade that is satisfactory or higher, and they're walking into high school without that burden on them to meet that high school requirement. But if you're not ready, we don't want you to go in Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. There's no benefit in going in if the distance between where you are in math and the beginning of Algebra 1. But back to Council President Navarro's point a little while ago, sometimes kids are ready and they still don't get in. So how do we pay attention to that? And we look at both numbers and percentages, and I'll give you a number that I think is quite interesting. If we had 5,000 students in Algebra 1 and completing successfully by the end of 8th grade, if we had 70% of them completing by the end of 8th grade, that's 3,500 students. If we have 8,000 in Algebra 1, and 60% of them complete by the end of 8th grade, that's 4,800 students. I guarantee you the 1,800 students we're talking about are students of color and students in poverty, or both. And that's essentially what we've done over the last 3 years. So even though the percentage of performance may go down, the true numbers of students who've benefited goes up. And Deb Muggy at Wheaton High School, the principal, says this, I love it. She says we look at percentages, we look at numbers, we look at names, we look at faces. What a great way, what a great model, and that's been shared with all of our administrators across the system, to think about making sure that we're finding every student who needs the most rigorous experience and then making sure they get it. And that's critical. And so when I say we're moving in the right direction, there are lots of things that are moving in the right direction. The goal is to coalesce those and keep bringing them together, make it more consistent, more less variability, and more stronger perceptions across the community and stronger reality within the school system that it doesn't matter where you go to school. You walk in the door, you're going to get a great education no matter who you are. That's really, really what it comes down to. Dr. McKnight, any thoughts about course enrollment? I know you have thoughts, but I'll put you on the spot and see if you have any that you want to share.
So part of socializing this study, I know our staff went out and had conversations with principals just around the idea of scheduling and how they do it. And it was a great discussion, and I think since then, even at our A&S meeting, we've had people continuing to ask the question, how are we scheduling? Is it giving us what we need for our students? And if it's not, how do we, within the context of each school, have a discussion about what that looks like? Although the study highlights these things, I think for people within each school building to say what's happening based on our current practice, they're going to have to ask that question themselves and see what's working and what's not working in order for them to invest in whatever they find is going to be best to serve their students. So I just want to, that's the only thing I'll add on. I think there have been some great discussions in our schools with our principals really looking at the process of looking at scheduling and all of that to, again, say, is this working for our students or not, and what do we need to change? And having teachers very much a part of that discussion as well, as important stakeholders in that. So yeah, that's all I'll add.
So if you look at this slide is particularly important because it talks about our focus group students. The 5 groups of students I talk about often are less likely to be enrolled in Algebra 1 than monitoring group students with the same incoming performance. So if you look down at the bottom, that's level 4 and level 5 of PARC. If you're reaching level 4 and level 5 of PARC, you're doing very well in your subject area, very well. In fact, I often say students who get a 5 on the English 10 PARC assessment could teach English. Trust me, I know a lot about the test, a lot, and I'm an English teacher. But one of the things that we've been able to do in evidence of learning and with our using student data is draw attention to this so that schools are more carefully examining what all those measures are, what's the evidence, and then placing students, I think, more consistently and with greater individual attention to the student and not just the grade. That's what we want to be doing, is looking at, because, if I got a C in the class, but I completely understand the content, I need to be in the next more rigorous class. I don't need to redo the class I just took or take the one that is less rigorous. There's nothing, wrong with having a C in the class. Sometimes even if I receive a D in the class, I'm better off to be in the higher level class because I understand it. I get it. I can help my peers. I just don't do any of my work, and I don't come to school and take my tests, and I do those things. Well, we have to separate all that out and really think about that, because while school prepares us for a job, it's not a job. There's one easy way to test that. No one gives our students a paycheck every other Friday. So we got to stop saying this is your job. This is your preparation for your life. And this is how you'll have the lifestyle that you want when you grow up, by learning these things. But we can't think that if you get an A, you're getting a high salary, and if you're getting a D, you're getting a low salary. If you have a D in a class but deeply understand the content, we need to not put you back in that content. We need to find a way to engage you so you can get a B and be in the high level content. And that's a shift in thinking in public education over the last 20 years, and one that really needs to happen around rigorous coursework. And we also need to say, and I'll go out on a limb here because I said earlier we've had a focus on competitive and highly competitive college attendance. As school professionals, we need to say to students, so you want to get your NATEF certification? Well, you understand you're fully ready to go to college. You want to get your NATEF certification? That's what you're telling me. We need to say, well, good for you. This is how you do it. And by the way, Ford will hire you at $65,000 with a high school diploma and these 3 certifications, which is not a bad thing, and it doesn't mean you won't go to college. We've got to somehow or another level the playing field and say grades matter, only so much. What you want to pursue is what you want to pursue, and we'll help you get there. But we want to have everyone ready for every option. That's a lot of aspiration, but I believe it's doable. And I think this study helps us think about how to do it better. I really do. I think it's the key. Ms. Evans?
I was just going to add that I totally agree with you, Dr. Smith, that this study gives us a way to say we do not have to continue doing things the way we've always done it just because we've always done it, right? We're able to see that our students' outcomes and experiences are not as favorable as we would like, in particular for our students in the focus groups, and we can do better. I just wanted to say that really quickly. That just kind of hit me, that we always do things the way we've always done it because we've done it, and that's not good enough anymore.
Can I just add something onto that? Because MCPS got hit a while ago for talking about going away from grades and test scores and having that sort of conversation. And it's very interesting. I was actually on a college tour at North Carolina State and was talking to one of the graduate students there who informed me that they don't get grades. They're in veterinary school and they don't get grades. It's either you know the subject or you don't. And the majority of people, the way the university looks at it is if you don't know the material, that's their fault, not yours. Because they're paid to ensure that you have the information. And so it's very interesting that for so long, what we've done is we've said it's somehow the student's fault that they got this grade, when in fact we as taxpayers are paying the system, and the system is designed in such a way that it's the imperative for us to ensure that the students are prepared, right? And so it's one of those where we lose if the student's not prepared. It's not necessarily that the student loses. Yes, they do lose, don't get me wrong. But we lose. We lose collectively when it comes to our knowledge base. We lose collectively in the sense of the earning potential that that individual has that then impacts us. We lose when it comes to health disparities and higher likeliness of crime and all kinds of stuff. All those things we lose. So it's an imperative on us to make sure that they are successful. It's imperative for us. And so I agree with you that looking at it from a different perspective, in the sense that this isn't the failure of the student, and it may not necessarily be that just because they got a differing grade in that class, whether it's a C or a D or even on a test, do they really understand? And was it that the child came to school that day and had a bad day? Had they been having a bad year? But they still do understand the material. It's just a comedy of circumstances that have led to what the issue is. We've all gone through bad stints in life where our performance just hasn't been there. Boss, you know, it's just been a really bad month. My mom was living with us, and, you know, such and such was sick and I had to care for her, and, you know, our house had problems and all of that. But I promise you next month it's going to be good because now all that stuff is addressed and taken care of. Those are real statements that we as adults say all the time. But if a child presents that, we think somehow that, no, that's just an excuse and that's not, and we can't do anything about it. I really do think, and I always get in trouble when I do this, but I really do think that it's important for us to start thinking about how it is that we evaluate our students. And just as you said, Ms. Evans, just because we've been doing it that way for all this time doesn't mean that that's the right way. It doesn't. And obviously people are going away from it. I mean, look, when we had in elementary school, right, we used to have A, B, C, D, and E's, right? We changed that. Why can't we continue that evolution and really get towards mastery and course mastery and making sure that folks understand the gist of what it is that we're trying to get them to do, understanding that if you miss one small piece, it's still important, and some of those things tying together, especially when it comes to math, so you need to know your concepts. But at the same time, I can give you that one concept and continue you on without you having to go back and take the entire course. And I lose more by having to keep you back or have you retake that course for that one concept versus giving you the support for that concept and continuing you on because the majority of stuff you understand. Again, I'm agreeing with you in the sense that I think that we need to continue to rethink and retool. And as we're talking about curriculum, as we're talking about our structure as a whole, this isn't just Montgomery County, this is nationwide, that we really need to think about what it is that we're doing in the education space and how we're evaluating the performance of our children. Because I think that there's another evolution that's yet to come that will get us to where we need to be.
Absolutely. I think we are in that evolution now, and people blame it on or attribute it to technology, but I think it's just the shifting world, and technology makes it more apparent. The last two sections of the report, one looks at our opportunity to be as students in courses with students who are performing at or above or below the same level we're in. And one of the dangers always is that we compress that too much, and we try to get students who are very tightly in the same level of learning, and it doesn't work, and we have to think about that. And then finally, the same question around leadership of schools and leadership and noviceness. Same thing. There's a general, on average, if you're a new principal, you're more likely to be in a school with a high percentage of students in poverty. And that's another question that we've been having some very good conversations with our administrative association as well as the other associations around how we think differently to incentivize and change the way we perceive and experience as adults the schools that we work in. And that goes to many of the things that you've said today in this presentation. But there's a lot here for you to look at and think about. We are available to come and do small group or one-on-one. Staff has done a lot of work with the staff of council members, and the county executive's office is also going to have additional sessions to look at the information here because we want to use it in a way that will be effective and productive and move us forward as a system, and not use it as a way to blame people or indict people or say the system has done really well in so many areas for so many students of all races, backgrounds, incomes, languages for so long. Not all. And so the question is, how do we continue to move forward to get to that all? And how do we use this information to help us get to that all? So we offer to you any conversation, any opportunity to sit down and look through the information in this study. We will continue, the board will continue to do this work together, and the staff will continue to work with the board to follow their direction in governance and leadership of the school system, and we'll continue to take things to them and bring them to you as ways of doing and being. And certainly today, many of the conversations have been really critical to the steps we're taking now and the next steps we are going to take as an organization. So that's a lot of information. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate your focus and intense support and challenging of the school system to do this work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Smith, for that. And as the council president said, we are going to certainly be utilizing this framework to certainly help us as we make the budget decisions that we make and as we continue to go through the school year evaluating processes. It's really very interesting that we have our racial equity framework that we're going to be utilizing for general government business. And now we have this framework that will help us to guide us when it comes to evaluating our school system and making positive and informed decisions about what best to do in terms of continuing to make sure our system is truly working for all. I did, in these last 15 minutes, want to invite up Diego Uriburu and Byron Johns to the dais if they would like to add any remarks. I do have Council President Navarro teed up next as well. But certainly with your evaluation of the report and being conveners of the Black and Brown Forum that I think moved very many people and tied in very well with what we've heard from the school system in terms of acknowledgement of what needs to be done next. I certainly want to give you an opportunity to kind of weigh in with your thoughts as well. But let me turn to Council President Navarro first.
Thank you. Just really want to dovetail on your comment because obviously our goal with the racial equity and social justice legislation is that, you know, agencies, departments, that everybody tries to work together and align the work. Obviously, the council cannot dictate what the Board of Education, you know, should do regarding this issue. But what we can do is, of course, work together to align everything, because at the end of the day, this is going to inform how are we going to make budgetary decisions. And so that's why for me it was just so exciting to, you know, to see this report and to also to see the participation of the community, because then we're all aligned. And the hope is that the desired state is that we then are able to realize that we have moved the needle on all these issues, that it's not just what's happening in the classroom, but as we make decisions on legislation, as we make decisions on budgetary allocations for transportation, housing, you know, safety net, whatever it is, that we see it through this lens. And so if we're all aligned, we should get to a really important place of dismantling all these structures that have continued to exacerbate these gaps. So I just really want to thank you for doing that. And it's really cool because Park and Planning has also begun a lot of work in this space. And so as we all kind of hold hands and move this forward, it will have a positive impact also on our fiscal stewardship, because, you know, right now we're doing a lot of things because we really care, but is it really aligned and is it really seen through that lens structurally? Not really. So that is another really wonderful benefit of this work, is that it will have a really great impact on our fiscal stewardship as well as our economic, you know, development and stability. So just wanted to thank you in terms of this particular point.
All right, gentlemen, turn it over to you, Mr. Johns.
Good afternoon, and I want to first I want to thank
Can you introduce yourself, Mr.
Okay,
Johns?
yes, Byron Johns. I'm the chair of the NAACP Education Committee and Parents Council, and I want to thank Councilmember Rice in particular for having this session. And again, I was telling Diego, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, because I know we had originally asked you to have this in September, but actually it's far better to have it when we're having it now. Thank you also, Councilmember Jawando and Council President Navarro, for all of your thoughts and comments, and also participating and attending the Black and Brown Forum we had recently. It has been a pleasure. I can't say enough about the work that Superintendent Jack Smith and now the Deputy Superintendent, Monifa McKnight, have been embracing this work. It has been something that has been a 10-year journey for me, longer for many of members, and it's really a joy with the board president, Shebra Evans, now, and the most diverse board we've ever had, really embracing this work. So we have cautiously optimistic and very hopeful that this is all the parties that are stakeholders and are the decision makers are really aligned. We think we've all worked closely to meet with the associations and other stakeholders, and for all that we've gotten so far, there's a violent agreement that this is long overdue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Uriburu.
Thank you. We are so happy that Diego Uriburu with Identity, and I don't want to repeat everything that Byron said. He just hurries to say everything, so I have nothing to say afterwards. But it is very true that the community understands the data. They understood the data. They were outraged by the data. because the data confirmed what they and their children had been experiencing for years and years. Even those whose children had left the school system identified their experiences using the data. And so thank you to the board and to MCPS for bringing that and to allow us to use the data. It's also true that these data it allowed the community to better understand the Racial Equity and Justice Act and to connect the dots. And for the few comments that we see regarding the boundary studies and Seneca and the comments that we saw in the articles after the Black and Brown Forum, there's thousands and thousands of others who are silent but are in agreement and support us. As we said at the forum, we all win. We can pull this off. So we will continue to work. We'll continue to bring community. This is a grassroots effort. It's not just Byron. We happen to be able to come here at 2:30 today, but this is not our coalition. This is not our movement. It's the people's movement. And we'll continue to bring them forward. We'll continue to help sometimes translate the data because sometimes it's not easy to comprehend. So we are just extremely thankful to all the parties and also with the associations. As Byron said, we have met individually with each of the associations more than one times, and they also seem to be aligned. We're concerned that the devil is always in the details. So we are hoping that both the school, the board, and the associations do what they have to do during their negotiations, because our families, our communities, and our kids' futures depend on them getting them right. And we will be watching. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diego and Byron. A great assessment, and again, great work in mobilizing and empowering our communities. And oftentimes when people have the information, just as we say with our students, empowerment is about having the information. And what we've done is we've empowered our community to make even better choices and be better advocates for themselves and their children based on this information. And thank you, MCPS, for commencing this study and getting this study underway that allowed for that information to be done. Dr. Smith, did you?
Can you take it back to the first slide?
Yep.
It won't click back there. I got it.
I got it.
Where is it? Go to, where's the first one? Go to slide.
Yeah, no, 2 seconds.
The very first one.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's previous. This one right here. Notice I didn't call attention to this, but this is something I've been using for a couple of years.
Yeah.
We started with information
Right.
3.5 years ago. We've built awareness.
Yeah.
I think now we've done some actions, but we're at a collective urgency place. And I think that bodes very well for the future, is by using exactly that model.
That's it.
To do what the gentleman just said.
Yep.
In this meeting. So critically important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really want to thank everyone for participating. This was very robust. Again, this will not be the last time that we go over this information and talk about it and evaluate it in our budgeting process as well. Unfortunately, I do need to close this with some terrible news. Unfortunately, one of the students from my alma mater, Montgomery Blair High School, and in Councilmember Jawando's, where he lives, not far from, committed suicide today and took their life. And so I just want to close with a moment of silence for this senior who unfortunately, and we're seeing this is unfortunately the season. So I want to encourage parents, friends and family to talk to their children and loved ones. The fall is oftentimes a very difficult time for folks who are struggling with mental challenges, and really trying to make sure that we can provide support and resources for them. So I just want to close with a moment of silence in memory of the student, and prayers for his family and his younger sibling who still attends Montgomery Blair High School. All right, thank you very much. We are adjourned. Thank you.